I have the honor of being the presenter today, and good afternoon to everyone who would be attending this session or would be watching it on YouTube or on our website in the future. We hope that it will help with some of the understandings and some of the concepts that revolve around this month, and we hope that we make it our job every month to be aware of what is going on around this issue, topic. So I wanted to just give you my understanding and participation in Women on the Move Board of Directors and what we do to inspire our audience, who are mostly young women, young girls, and women of all ages. And this is what we hope to do, to educate, to inspire, and to empower. And going throughout this workshop and this presentation, I would like to give some input as to each one of those components. And then, of course, it's up to us individually to start our own journey of self-exploration, education, inspiration, and empowerment. I'm just hoping that we would start on that path if we have not already and become part of that movement. As far as giving you a little bit of history on this, there are so many websites, and on the web, the wealth of information, availability of resources, videos, films, information, historical landmarks, legal discussions, you name it, it's available. I just wanted to give a very brief review of this long path on this journey that women have come. For the past 2,000 years, we've faced the issue of violence against women. However, it is really in the last 150 years where some movement had started and then some serious conversation in the last 70 years. So I wanted to direct our attention to a website that has all of this information in a very detailed way. And it is the Center for Women, Peace and Security. And it really walks us through the years, the landmark years. And it's basically the cluster of years that have made impact in the lives of women, starting with 1791 and starting with Mary Wollstonecraft and the book that she wrote about a vindication of rights of women. And it was prompted by a French author who had started writing about the rights of men. And she felt obligated and prompted to write something about the rights of women. Then it took, as you know, about 140, 150 years for the next serious movement, even though there was some movement by philosophers, by thinkers, by people who wanted to be looking at human rights issues, but they all fell short when it came to rights of women by differentiating between women and men and not allowing women to have the full benefit of the human rights thinking and application and benefits, because they considered women either with less of morality or with less capabilities or with less mental capacity. And with that distinction, it took a long time to really overcome some of the biases and some of the norms that were based on power, the control of power in the societies, whether the power is by wealth, by ownership of property, by force, and the physical force. So the first time that really securing some legal foundation was discussed was the UN Charter, which started in 1945. And then all those years into the 60s, we see that there are some movement towards the progressive understanding of women's rights. And then the period of the 60s to 70s was really recognizing how women could have a role in places of decision making. And again, it was the United Nations that started creating an area of status of women as opposed to just looking at it as part of the human rights issues. And then between 75 and 85, for that decade following, it was mostly the decade about women, and there's a typo there, but the first World Congress on Women in 1975. And then for the decade following that, most of the movements were towards bringing equality, the understanding of justice, the understanding of doing something towards development of the community so that it moves towards peace, moving away from violence. And for the first time, experts are getting together, talking about what are the causes of violence and how is it that we're addressing that. Then after 1995 to today, and that coincides with the time where the Violence Against Women Act was first introduced and put in effect, and then every several years it was renewed as if it's something that may no longer be necessary for the laws to be helping women in that area. So it hasn't become the permanent laws. It had not become the permanent laws, and it was to be renewed. And we've seen that has happened to help women to have the protection of the laws, even though we all will see that eventually the laws alone are not enough to get this movement to where it should go to, because it's the norm of the culture and the religion and the traditional social acceptable behaviors is what has given rise to these deep-rooted prejudices and embedded concepts that there is an inferiority of women and a superiority of men. So it was, let's just go to the next slide and see if there was a case that brought the concept of violence against, and it's Aydin versus Turkey, which is for the very first time the war crime of torture are now including, after the decision in that case, 1994, as late as that, a girl who was subjected to repeated acts of violence and sexual violence and rape was brought to court for the claims that she had that had to distinguish what she had been subjected to from the acts of torture that her family were subjected to by the invasion of her country by the troops. So for the first time, they were looking at issues in a different light, and for the first time, the court recognized that repeated hours and hours and days of torture mixed with rape, after some experts finally decided that her virginity was lost through the acts of rape and not due to other reasons, that they finally decided that a rape in that scenario does constitute torture. And then we see that series of case law and decisions by the courts that starts looking at the issue of torture as it relates to women. It's different than when others are subjected to it. For women, it has a different meaning. Not only it's more traumatic at the time that it happens, but it has lingering effects for decades and decades throughout the life of that woman. And it disables that individual from participating in the society in the instance that is intended to be. So the facts that we know today, and this is right hot off the press, and this is from World Health Organization, WHO, and as of September of 2020, those studies have these numbers, and I wanted to make sure that this information is shared. However, since we might produce these documents on our website, I don't think there is a point for me to go through every single one of them, but it is almost common knowledge that 1/3, which means 1 of every 3 women worldwide, have experienced or will experience physical or sexual intimate partner violence, or through their relationship with a non-partner, sexual violence in their lifetime. And these are often done by the intimate partner of the women, and it is some form of physical or sexual, and that it has the negative effects that are not only physical, mental, and it affects the reproductive health. As a matter of fact, it was the cost of health of addressing, I'm going to let another individual into the room. It was the expense and the cost, the overwhelming cost of treating women for their injuries as a result of sexual violence or violence by partner or non-partner that caused the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. We hear that name often these days due to the pandemic, and their statements and their credibility is known worldwide. But it wasn't until CDC brought it up, the issue of violence against women, as a concern, as a health concern, that the rulers and the lawmakers started to think about it in a serious way as to what do we do to try to eliminate the root causes of that. And as the key facts, it is identified now by WHO, again, the World Health Organization, that these physical violences are more likely to be perpetrated when there is low level of education. And this applies across the board to men and women who have been subjected to maltreatment or exposure to violence during their childhood years. And then for men, it's a sense of entitlement. And for women, is an attitude of accepting the unfounded norms of the culture and social behaviors and the religion that male privilege has to exist, and the women have to be subordinate to men. And those we can talk about a little bit more as to the historical basis for passivity and of women and the aggression of men. Then they are presenting evidence to the world. This is a world organization that counseling interventions, empowering women, advocacy for women, providing those resources for women, as well as visitation, home visits for women, are promising measures of either preventing and or reducing this very huge ill in our society. And they are, of course, attributing the conflict and displacement as exacerbating the situations. If there is existing violence, of course, the poverty issues affected, the abuse of drug and alcohol is aggravating it. And those are the items that are identified now, and it would be ways of prevention as well as cure. Then there are the patterns of behavior. We talked about the patterns of behavior that are accepted in a culture or through the social acceptance based on the laws of religion or based on the laws of the community. So when United Nations made a call based on focus on the status of women to be the subject to be discussed, one of the organizations that came up with solutions and statements and calling the world's attention to the issue was the Baha'i International Community. It's a faith-based community, it's a faith community, but so much of the faith-based social action, public discourse, engagement, and progressive movements have been built around that I'm going to be referring to some of their statements throughout this presentation, because it's one of the newer religions in the world, and it has mandates and workable, practical blueprints on how to get to the root of some of these issues and be able to address and deal with that. So the patterns of behavior that are discussed in this document that was presented to the first time, it was the 51st session of the UN Commission on Human Rights. It was in 1995, which is, as you recall, the historic landmarks of things happening at the world level, at the global level, was around 1994 with the congresses that were held internationally. So their presentation says that whether it's political or religious systems, or whether it's unfounded scientific theories, any of these abusive practices are affecting the fabric of the society. And the society that is governed by aggressivity, domination by competition, and ruling by force, those would lead into abusive practices against women. So the more we see that violence prevailing in the society altogether, the more of its impact is sensed and felt on half of the body of the community that is dealing with that violence, who are the women. And no matter how much the laws and the courts and the government will attempt to bring laws that will change the fabric of that community and that society, a lot of those old patterns, because of the religions that accept honor killing, for example, or some of the cultures that force child marriage, the acceptable norms such as dowry killings or femicide, and we'll look at some of that in the next few slides, and the fact that the husband owns a wife. No matter how many laws come into play, those old, deep-rooted norms that are accepted in the culture will be hard to change. So we see some of the things leading to conflict are part of the acceptable norms. In the past several centuries, the humanity has had to come away from some of the acceptable norms. And we now see that the result of it is in terms of wars, poverty, homelessness, not having equal education opportunities, not having equal access to employment, or even when there is access to employment, there is not equality in the pay levels. There is so much that needs to be addressed. And if we were to address one and each individually and separately from the collective whole, it would not take care of and address the destruction of that fabric of the society that the big picture will show us. So let's go to the next slide that talks about the female infanticide. This is, again, one of the acceptable norms where women pregnant with a female in their wombs, they are allowed to be subjected to violence in form of killing that child. And if you look at some of the reasons where this lowering of the number of female to male ratio throughout the world is prevalent and nobody's stopping it, is mainly due to the profits and to the large amount of money. And we will see that eventually it leading to sex trafficking, leading to child bride practices, being a $32 billion industry. That is not going to easily go away because of so many forces and dynamics at work to keep that low ratio and not make a change anytime soon. So again, some of these, the female genital mutilation, there are organizations that have worked so hard towards making that one of the reasons where people could flee their countries and come to this country to be allowed residency or citizenship based on those type of practices. Again, when we talked about that, killing the female infants and allowing the feticide would be a leading cause for sex trafficking. And we see that those numbers in every country, the number of girls missing overall in the world, 100 million girls are missing to feed into that $32 billion. And the numbers are definitely larger. The last time they've done these numbers has been, about a decade ago. So those numbers would have to be updated. Some of the countries in the world, however, such as Papua New Guinea, they allow some progression of the rights of women to become prevalent in their communities because of allowing the faith organizations, allowing some of the progressive movements in their country to bring the women's level of education and understanding and participation in decision making to a level that would allow this understanding of women's rights to penetrate throughout the community. And we see that, the Baha'i community came up with a statement that presented to the government, and it went viral on the social media. And it showed how receptive the community and the population was to getting that kind of message from the organization that issued that statement. And they said that they likened the men and women in the world as to two wings of a bird. And both of those wings, although cannot be replaced and used to function as the other one, they need to complement each other, and they need to both be strengthened equally so that this bird of humanity could fly to its highest level of prosperity and strength. So the world is coming to an understanding that if we shut down and quiet down and silence the 50% of the population of the world and not allow them to be in decision-making roles, that it would affect the humanity at large, and not just women suffer from it, but both men and women and the whole world will suffer from it. The statistics are basically numbers. We could find them, but it's mind-boggling that 1 in 3 women have to experience the physical violence. So when we look around us, when we are in our gatherings, when we see that some of the people around us are not happy, they're not themselves, they're going, into that dark whole dark spot, when we ask them to open up, when we offer help, we may want to inquire more. We may want to offer our loving embrace to help, because the statistics are just offensive, and it makes all of us want to do more about it. And although men are also the subject of physical violence and intimate partner violence in their lifetime, the numbers are definitely higher for women. And on as far as reporting, as far as getting those reported to the police or to the authorities or even to the family members or even to the church, those numbers need to improve if anything meaningful is going to take place to change the fabric of this area. Why did we call it love? Ms. Marino did explain a bit about that, as every one of these abusive relationships will start with love, will start with a charming individual who will sweep one other person off their feet and will get them to start believing and trusting that that individual is the only one for them. And then after a while, all these abusive practices start. And this is from the person that you love. And unfortunately, the reciprocity that needs to exist does not exist. You love them, you trust them, and they don't love and trust back. And therefore, the suspicions get to increase. The humiliation is on the rise. The relationships of the individual victim is being scrutinized. The relationship with the family and friends are being controlled and observed and monitored. The access to finances becomes very difficult. The independence of that individual, if that person has been working and having had some kind of financial independence, all of that is starting to slide away. And the idea of the abuser is that this person becomes so dependent on that abuser that eventually, when the level of abuse is beyond emotional and beyond the intimacy of the bedroom and gets into actual physical abuse, examples that the law does recognize: slapping, punching, hitting, biting, pushing, and now stalking, now interfering with their private space in the internet or in their emails, their communications being controlled, their friendship and association with friends is being controlled. So eventually, some of that could be threatening to kill the individual, to kill the pet of the family, to kill themselves. The abuser a lot of times uses the love of that victim to have mercy on the abuser by saying that if you leave me, I will kill myself. So it's either force or it's relying on their sense of love and compassion. So again, there are some of these concepts that have been recognized, and all of it has to do with love. Many of the victims, many of the women who are victims have stated that they feel like they need to help this person with their illness. So they identify the ailment. They identify that something is wrong. Eventually, when they start getting smarter and looking into this and realizing that it's really not them that is causing all of this, because that's one of the tactics that the abuser uses, is that constantly asking them, see what you're making me do. I'm a good person, but you're making me do that. So again, this just identifies some of those. I don't want to go into it, but again, everything starts with that love, with creating that cycle, that vicious cycle, and then all of it is around the hopes of the individual that this person will get better because they love that person. They don't really have a true concept of love. They will not be communicating with anyone because it's their choice of a relationship. And then eventually they start losing trust in others because these individuals are so popular and so charming that they have made the victim believe that no one's going to believe them. So, and they are all going to think that this person is a crazy person. So again, they feel that they are more and more attached to the abuser. And then the abuser denies all of that. And then this is the tension building phase. I'm hoping that you're all familiar with this, and all those who will be visiting our website will get themselves familiar with this cycle if they're not already, that it's the reason that it takes several years for a victim to even walk away from that relationship is that they start believing that this will go away, or there is a tension building phase, and there's the explosion, and then the honeymoon phase. The abuser comes back, sometimes with jewelry, with flowers, with apologies, and then there's a period of time where things are good, and then children or the neighbors or friends forget, and then this person starts acting out again. So being familiar with these is very important. Again, those will be available on the website, and they're on the internet in abundance. But it's good to know that the law recognizes a lot of areas of abuse, and more there's education in the courts about it, the more the decision makers and the judges and the court system will acknowledge that these women have not come to court because the abuse doesn't end in the home or in the intimacy of the relationship, but it continues in the court system. So if they could not fight back or get themselves saved within that relationship, once they finally split and get themselves on an independence road or the road to independence, that they're now being victimized and abused within the court system, because it takes money, it takes power, it takes a lot of fighting to overcome this individual who, by the very nature of that relationship, is losing power every step of the way. And by the time they get to court, they either have no security financially, no shelter. You know, the available resources are not sufficient for the number of individuals that need those resources. And then, of course, the stigma that is attached with it, the fact that they're children, the fact that the laws necessarily do not allow every woman or every victim with an adult child to be in those shelters. And then many of them are just facing roadblocks every step of the way, even after they find the strength and courage to step out. And again, this wheel is very famously presented in many of the websites. And I don't want to go through that. We talked about the economic abuse. Some of the ways is to incur debt. Put the name in the spouse's name in the cases that is possible, or the partner's name who is the victim, and then max out the amount of equity and cash out of the equity, and then this individual is stuck with debts, credit cards the same way. And often in my practice, I've experienced that those cashes that are out of the equity before the transfer of names takes place are used to finance another relationship. There are homes bought in places where the United States courts may not have jurisdiction over the property, and the person again feels out of luck and out of resources to challenge that abuser in court. The dating relationship, everything that was said about the relationship could be amplified and doubly applicable to the teen dating. The numbers are just as bad in the teen dating relationship, often because the young victim has more tendency to be relying on that one individual who's become the partner. And by that relationship, the victim, the teenager or the young victim, has basically isolated herself out of the relationship with the parents, and now does not have the face or the courage to go back and tell them that her choices were wrong. It's also a sign of significance and importance within the youth and within the peer group of that victim, and having somebody, a partner of some sort, brings them a higher level of identity and some kind of significance in their group, and they are sticking to that relationship at any cost. They're not letting go, and it's not often that they could have 2 or 3 potential candidates to be their partners. Once they're with someone through the years in high school or in college, it's hard to split away and exercise your other options, explore your other options, and find out if there are other people who could give you a different way of love, because then that's definite confusion with the concept of love by the teenagers who haven't had too many experiences of experiencing love with an intimate partner. So as a parent, as a friend, as an auntie, as a grandparent, as a friend, as a teacher, as a social worker, it's the job of all of us to be familiarizing ourselves with what's going on in the world of our children, and save those who need to be rescued, even though there is a lot of resistance, at least for the first several years of being in that relationship, because of the isolation, because of the fact that they have no resources, the fact that even a cell phone may not be made available to them, or the cell phone may be monitored, and the consequences are grave. The punishment and the penalties and retaliation by the abuser is so grave that that person may not want to have any communication with anyone. This picture, and I use that for my presentation, I really have issues with the understanding and concept of love, where a young girl thinks that, I miss him or I love him, and that person beats that victim up all the time. There was one quote in one of the international conferences where a Japanese woman, a young woman, was interviewed, and she had observed abuse in her family from her mother being the victim of an abuse. And she had said, "No, I have a very good husband. He only beats me once a week." And that was a concept that to her was of a good partner, because compared to what she had been exposed to, that was a good treatment. So the statistics about the children, 1/3 of those children who have either been abused or been exposed to abusive relationships or observing their parents, they end up being an abuser or becoming abused again in their relationship. So that makes our responsibility much more intense and much more important to be watching for all the next generations that will be impacted by the abuse. Some of these pictures are almost unbelievable, but not only the love should not hurt the feelings, but it should not be the reason for any kind of physical violence. And that should be the very obvious sign that love has been replaced by hatred and there is no room for the relationship. I have another person entering the group here. So again, another very graphic picture. He beat her 150 times. She only got flowers once. So we can't take this lightly. The October month of awareness cannot be about people who are either victims or have been very closely connected with the victims. It's about everybody. It's about this vicious cycle that eventually becomes more and more aggressive, more and more violent, more and more forceful, and then often turns into death of the individual victim if they don't save themselves. As some of the models that are being presented to the world, and this is going global, and when we get to the inspiration part, as soon as I'm done with the educational part, we would be looking at some of the ways where the world is responding to this. And the world is addressing the economic disparity, the legal inequality, to allow women to find their status and become more self-sufficient so that they can walk away from the abusive relationships. But one of the things that was presented by the faith community, the international Baha'i community, was that it's not about economic equality or just getting the position of equal pay or equal education, although having education will help women get higher and higher in the places of decision making. But it's really the concept of oneness of humanity, the fact that a soul does not have a gender, the fact that every individual, given the opportunity, could prove their capabilities, and that comes through service and understanding who we are, understanding the assets that are held within us and need to be polished and brought out to flourish. Those are the concepts that the faith communities are now working on. And not only the faith communities, but the leaders and the healers are trying to get into the surface of the understanding and eliminate the self-confidence, the doubt that women, the victims, may have had about their capabilities because they've been told so. From the time of being brought up in a family who believed that, in a Christian society who believed that, in a faith or religion that promoted passivity and silenced the cry of the individual, and to the laws that were not as effectively helping everyone. So this is actually a subject that is having to do with the title of a presentation, again, the Commission on the Status of Women, called by the United Nations in just the recent years, 2018. A statement was presented by the Baha'i world community to the Commission, and that's where they raised it above just bringing women to economic equality or education equality, brought them to the point of morally, it is unacceptable if we look at gender as a sign of distinction. And we need to bring up the capabilities of every individual, and every victim needs to recognize their powers. And one of my friends who has joined the conversation hopefully will shed more light on it in the question and answer session on the asset-based way of healing and the victims and those who need to recognize their powers through what's within and not what appears to be their material possessions. So hopefully that there's a lot more on education that each of us will try to explore and then keep constantly up to date as to what's going on in that field. But inspiration is another goal of the Women on the Move Network, and all these empowerment workshops are designed to do. And the quote that I found, unfortunately, is cut off on top, is that too many of us are not living our dreams because we're living our fears. And the fact that we should be getting to a point where we would do away with fear and play our role, play our part in the big picture, is something that I wanted to share through a video. That is a 3-minute video, and that's, again, the United Nations presentation of what is being done, and it gives us hope. It gives us inspiration, knowing that we're part of a huge movement. We're not alone in this. As they say, we're in it together, and we're going to make progress. So let's see if this helps getting us there.
Globally, 1 in 3 women and girls worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence during their lifetime. Less than 40% of them seek help of any sort, and of these, only 10% seek support from police. And of all women who were victims of homicide worldwide in 2012, 50% were killed by intimate partners or family members. This situation cannot be overlooked. And although progress has been made, the end of violence against women and girls is far from today's reality. UN Women is committed to this cause and works with governments, national actors, women's organizations, and the civil society to end violence against all women and girls. The international community recently agreed that ending violence against women and girls is an important target for a sustainable future and a crucial matter to achieve the SDGs. During this process, we must make sure that we reach the lost woman. By its presence in more than 85 countries on all world regions, UN Women actively contributes to making this possible. We support countries in many ways, including adopting, implementing, and evaluating comprehensive laws and policies, addressing the root causes of violence through prevention strategies, and working with communities to change the social norms. Ensuring that essential services and support are accessible to all survivors. And collecting data and conducting analysis to fully understand the nature and extent of the problem. UN Women envisions a world where all women and girls are equal and empowered members of society, free of all forms of discrimination and violence by 2030. But let's not wait until then. Let's act now. We need your help and commitment to make sure that we reach the last woman. Together we can make it happen. If not now, when? If not you, who?
If not now, when? If not you, who? And this is going to be the call to action by this small organization who's doing its best to get education, inspiration, and empowerment. Every woman or girl that comes to its within its reach. Last time we took a moment of silence to dedicate to the honor of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And as we're talking about change and progression, I want us to just pay a moment of silence, not a full minute, but just thinking deep in as we think about our roles. It does not have to be a role that somebody like Justice Ginsburg took. It was a very hard road for her to take. It's our part to play our role, no matter how hard it will be. So think about what we can do to play our part. I wanted to share the story of Tina Turner, and I'll end with that song where the love got her in trouble, and when she understood that the love had turned into the abusive relationship, her friends introduced her to Buddhism. And Buddhism and her faith, as simple and easy those concepts were, it helped her pull herself out of that dark hole that she had in that very abusive relationship. So we see that abuse doesn't know limits of power, wealth, and that person's status in the community, because that person goes into the privacy of their intimate chambers, and then they could be the victim. I had some quotes from the Baha'i faith because of the empowering energy that it produces throughout the environment. I wanted us to be learning to just getting into the habit of using the scripture, whatever faith scripture we use that to empower us, to connect us to the Holy Spirit, to the force of the energy around us. And then maybe with this song, we'll just be repeating that to ourselves. The lyrics are written in this one.
You must understand, the touch of your hand makes my pulse react. That it's only the thrill of boy meeting girl, opposites attract. It's physical, only logical. You must try to ignore that it means more than that. Oh, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? It may seem to you that I'm acting confused when you're close to me. If I tend to look dazed, I read it someplace. I've got cause to be. There's a name for it. There's a phrase that fits. But whatever the reason, you do it for me. Oh, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? I've been taking on a new direction, but I have to say, I've been thinking about my own protection. It scares me to feel this way. Oh, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? What's got to do with it? What's love but a sweet old-fashioned notion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? Who got to do with it?
Entertainment industry has had a major contribution to the awareness of individuals and bringing it up to the surface. However, we all have to play our part, and I wanted to just end with a few organizations that are doing things, and you've been seeing some as throughout this presentation, but search and find your place. I don't want to make a pitch for the Women on the Move network, but that's a very good start, actually. It's on the local level, doing a lot to empower our girls and women, to show them what healthy relationships look like, what unhealthy relationships they should stay away from, and how the friendship and the fun and the love that comes from those relationships are very different than the love that the abuser might use in charming them and trying to isolate them from the rest of the world. So with that, I have resources. I will be displaying those on the website of the Women on the Move, and I will stop sharing because I want to leave room for some discussion. No question answers. I don't have any answers. I just have questions. So
I think the topic and the way that this is approached on a daily basis has become very rich in resources, as you're so graciously sharing with everyone. But we know that that's not the case. That it's still rampant. And I was just reflecting on this in a class that I was in, and an African American student started talking about being in an abusive relationship. And someone said, "So why didn't you call the police?" She said, "You don't do that. You do not do that." And she talked about why you don't do that. And it was really eye-opening. So I think the more we can have these conversations with friends, and particularly, I'm thinking of the young girls, how many of them have seen parents in an abusive relationship, but didn't know that wasn't the norm? Doesn't every family experience this? And I think that for me is the centerpiece of where we are, is how to introduce this topic to younger girls who don't know to question their family dynamics and the environment in their home. And I think that's where Women on the Move can play a central role, very carefully, but a central role in what they do.
Yeah, thank you. That is one of our goals, and especially with our junior high school girls who are just at that age that they're looking around and thinking about relationships of their own.
Yes.
And it's not a topic that we wanted to introduce into our program, but we had to because it was necessary. All right. Anybody else would like to comment or have a question?
I sort of like Soheila. I've been an attorney for 40 years, and I have seen so much of this and how it's changed in the conversation. When the Domestic Violence Against Women's Act passed Congress, you finally got a wake-up call for people. They didn't realize that it's not normal to get hit every night. I had one person who was a nurse, and she was having a difficulty with the guy, and she asked her mother-in-law. Mother-in-law says, "What? He doesn't beat you every day. What's the matter with you? It's your fault." I had one where the woman was married for 30 years, had 4 kids, stayed in the relationship, and the mother-in-law said, "Well, it's your fault. You didn't give him what he needed, so he had to go get all those other women, and it's okay if they beat you because they only did it once in a while. I don't know what you complaining about." And it goes back to what those people grew up with, what their history was, that it was normal. There was very important progress during this period of time, and there was something called the battered woman syndrome, which was attacked because it's not a technical syndrome. But in that battered woman's book that came out and really called everything into question, people started realizing that domestic violence is more than having a black eye once in a while. Oh, I hit a doorknob. There's something more than that. It's hiding, protecting, concealing. I've had people who've been locked in their bedroom while the husband went to work because he's afraid she was going to have an affair with somebody. She was already pregnant. There were people who were, they just don't realize that because he manages all the money, he's the money manager. I'm just supposed to raise the kids and that's it. And that's how my mommy did it. That's how my grandmommy did it. That's how it was supposed to be. No. And in the legal system, it's very difficult because I had 2 cases last year. It just about tore me up because one of them should never have been granted. It was bull brought by a manipulative woman. And then I had the other one where everything, I had 2 people come and testify. I had my client testify. All the guy said was, didn't happen. Judge says, well, you haven't sustained your burden of proof, so no restraining order. I'm sorry. I kind of almost had a loss of confidence in the entire legal system over that one case. So what I'm saying is it's not new, but it's people are really starting to realize what it really is. Because anyone who has been subjected to any of the things that are portrayed here knows what it is, but just doesn't realize. And in the battered woman's syndrome, if you will, it's a learned helplessness. You don't realize that you can do anything. Don't call the police because it won't do any good. They might just arrest you because you hit him first. What do we do? What do we do? I can't do anything. And you become so used to it. They actually had a test done when they were writing this book where they talked about a study where they had these little baby rats. And I hate this because little baby rats are still little rats. Okay. They're still alive. They took the baby rat and put it in a pool of water. It swam and swam and swam and swam and swam and fought and fought and fought before it died. Then they took the baby rat, kept it in their hand, wouldn't allow it to move, wouldn't allow it to do anything. They put it in the tub of water. It fell to the bottom immediately. Didn't even think that it could fight. The conditioning of thinking you cannot do anything about it. You cannot call the police. You cannot do this. If you call the police, then you're going to have to bail him out. It's going to be legal fees for your family. It's going to be miserable. All of the bad advice that you get from the family members who have lived through it themselves, just ignore it. It'll go away. No, it doesn't. It's not COVID. It's not going to go away. I'm sorry. I'm taking up a lot of time. So I'm just telling you that it's a struggle. It's been a struggle. And it's different now than it was 40 years ago due to people like Soheila and Barbara and moving these things forward. And when you look at it in the United States, it doesn't seem so bad. You look at it worldwide, it's catastrophic. I've had cases in which the Korean boy would go to China to steal a girl because they kill all the girl children in Korea. So they go and steal a woman from China to take to Korea because they kill babies if they're girls.
Yeah. Thank you, Delilah. It's sometimes it's really discouraging, and yet, as we saw, there has been significant progress, at least in this country and in some others. And there's still a lot of work to be done worldwide.
I probably have a lifetime that I could share with everybody, but as far as this, I mean, there are degrees of abuse that we don't look at. And they're also because of learned behaviors on the woman's part. She may be seeing something that's not really there, for one thing. And she's reacting to maybe something in the past that she learned. So she has a responsibility as well as the man. And most of the time, the woman feels she has no power. But when you work through it, you find out, oh my God, I have more power than I realized. I could have got out of this a long time ago. But everything's risky. I didn't get abused like that, but I could just imagine the girl that was saying, you can't call the police. Well, you can't. You might get beat up worse. You might get killed by your assailer. The police might not understand, so I could see why she would say that. But I think, if you want to help somebody, you must have the places to take that person.
Yeah.
So you get prepared. I'll come by at noon and we'll take you. And you get it all set up. And many times she doesn't want to do it when it comes to the bottom line. So we have a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult. I've been in a situation trying to help someone, got her to the courthouse, filled in papers, we found a spot for her in a shelter, but she had to get this restraining order before she could go. And I guess there were a lot of prayers going on that day, because we were able to snatch the last available appointment hearing with a judge, and the judge was a woman, thank God. And so we got it, and she got her into the shelter. But it was a mind-boggling experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had one other thing to add. That it doesn't work just one way. If a woman has been raised where the father beat up the mother all this time, and she has all this anguish underneath, she can be just as violent toward her significant other. Mm-hmm. And I had one case in which the guy, they asked him at the trial, did you hit her, bat her away? Yes. Why? Because she pushed me against the glass window and bumped my head. And she was violent toward me, and I was defending myself. Sometimes it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it's true. And you have to watch it, because some people have that explosion inside of having been treated that way or seen it treated in their family, and they will explode. Yeah. So it isn't just go one way. There's a lot of domestic violence out there, and a lot of it, sometimes it's learned behavior. This is what happened, and I'm just going to blow up. So it doesn't go just one way, but primarily it is, especially in some circumstances in England way back when. Yeah, the man owned the woman, she had no rights to have any property rights. Everything belonged to the husband, first the father, then the husband. She was a non-entity, sort of like the cow that just went along with the process. So we have to overcome, as Soheila was saying, all of these old feelings that the man owns the woman. And it was how many years ago before we actually got to vote?
Yeah, 1921, not so long ago.
100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been about 2,000 years. So in the last 150 years, we've made a lot of progress. But just wanted to finish my comments by saying that I touched probably just one speck of dust in a whole field of domestic violence or violence against women. And I understand that it could be against men. We did cover a lot of that in the beginning of our conversation, but it will take really years and years for organizations like us to be touching the surface of this old-rooted problem. So I hope that we don't think that we've covered everything today, because there's so many dimensions, and even to start the conversation from different dimensions. But that, as far as what this organization can do, and I wanted to have my contribution to this organization, is that teaching healthy relationships and teaching that oneness of all of us, and the fact that it's everybody's responsibility should be what we take home with us. That once we help, we'll be empowered ourselves, and maybe that'll get us to talking with someone who needs it.
First of all, wanted to thank you, Barbara, and thank Soheila, and say that honestly, truly, how lucky we are to have somebody like Soheila who takes time and talks to us and discover all of these and bring it in front of our eyes. And I'm sure all of us at one point, we can use the information, and it's very, very valuable. But I have a concern and a question. According to the conversation that went on today at this session, you said that there are cases that if women call the police, it would make the situation worse, and she will be afraid of the more coming towards her. At that situation, even if it is the middle of the night, are there any agencies, other women agencies like shelter places or anybody else, a group, a volunteer group,
to interrupt, but you have
been called at that time instead of police, call someone to go, for example, 2 or 3 more people, go to that home and be there at least when police or until police come. So the situation would be less deniable with the presence of more people being witness or comforting, or maybe a percentage of, scary part to the, abused person, abusing person, abuser. So are there any organizations?
There are, but you see, Ziba, there are only so many slots, so many beds. And you call some of these agencies and they say, well, we're full. We don't have any space for you. And in many cases, you have to get there on your own. They don't come and get you, or they will meet you somewhere. So, yes, there are, but not nearly enough. And the thing is, unless you're going to stay out, if you go back home and he is there, it will be hell to pay.
Mm.
And it happens over and over and over and over again.
Barbara, I'd like to address Ziba's question in a different way. It still addresses the same concern, but to get out of a situation, if it is a once in a lifetime, with the example that you said, it might be that you will call a relative that will come and get you. But if it is a revolving door where you've been in an abusive relationship for a long time, and now eventually you've decided you're going to call the police, you don't do it haphazardly. The shelters, the organizations that are planning the rescue, they have trainings on how to create an exit plan, how to make plans months ahead of the actual day where you're going to be calling someone. Because as Barbara mentioned, once you leave that household, you have to have every plan in place that you will not go back to that man. Mentally, emotionally, psychologically, you have to be done. And then financially, and a place and a roof over your head, knowing that your child is of an age that will be accepted in a shelter. And what if you left in the middle of the night and then the shelter, you don't meet the requirement that shelter has, and you're going to have to get back to that person, and now you'll be beat up twice or 3 times as much. So, yeah, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of wise and careful planning for a while if you are going to make that. Because as I mentioned earlier, they'll abuse you in the relationship, they'll abuse you in the court system, they'll abuse you even when you're done with the court system. And you got to know all of that. And when you're ready, then you're ready to face all of that.
Jay,
And there needs to be funding. There needs to be money. There needs to be more places for people to go. Because like you said, if it's just one shot deal the first time, you may just turn around and go right back to it, and it could get worse. But when people come to me and they have this egregious story to tell, and it's repeat over and over, it's a plan. You have to have a landing spot. You have to have a place ready. And there needs to be some resources, because it's like, oh, I'm in the house. My adult children are here. He manages all the finances. He hits me all the time. The kids try to look the other way. I can't leave. I can't take the kids. The kids won't back me up because he won't take care of them financially anymore. What do I do? It's a plan, and it's a major production, if you will. It takes a little while to do. When you call relatives are like, nah, they've been through this many, many times. And a lot of them will not assist because maybe they have their own problem, just like it at home. It's difficult. We need funding, and we need people like these ladies to help us out. Thank you.
Jay, did you have something?
Well, this whole conversation has just stirred me up. So thank you. And quite truthfully, so much has happened, and I lots of things in life have happened. And I was just sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I used to teach a class at Mount St. Mary's on women in Christianity. And I showed a film on domestic violence in that class because it centered around religion. And there was an African-American woman who told the story of her husband was a minister, that she would go to church with him on Sunday morning. And she said, and he would stand there and talk about the love of God, Jesus, and this kind of thing. And then that night, it wasn't uncommon for him to beat her. And how do you leave a minister was her question. This is a man of faith. But with these two attorneys sitting here, what really came to my mind was in that same film was a woman named Delia. And she was the first woman to get clemency for shooting her husband because of domestic violence. When I was at CGU, we had a conference on women, prison, and something else. It's been a while. And she was the speaker there. But her husband would beat her. He started sexually abusing her daughter. And one day he came and she got a restraining order. And it didn't work. It didn't work. All the things that you guys are talking about, she left, she went to a shelter, he tracked her down. And finally he came home one night and demanded her to have oral sex with him. And she said, no, I won't do that. And he said, okay, that's all right. I'll get her to do it. And it was their 12-year-old daughter. And that's all it took. And she went to the closet where he had his gun. She took the gun out and just shot him dead right there. And she said, her children, she had 4 children, still gives me chills. She said, I know I'm going to pay a big price. She ended up going to prison. She said, I know I'm going to pay a big price, but I know my children are safe because he is dead. Mm-hmm. And so she had some great people around her and got clemency and was released as of that.
Yeah.
There was a story about the burning bed.
Yes. Yes. I've seen that as well. And so my point is there's no community off limits on this, and as much as we can ascribe to religion, it happens even there. So we can't afford to have blinders on in terms of how we look at this topic, because it hits on all races, religions, and as much as we don't want to think about it, I think it's important to have a wide span of who can fall victim to this.
The same for socioeconomic things.
Exactly.
Rich, poor, it doesn't matter.
No.
It goes all the way through.
I'm going to take to the board the suggestion that we will do once a month at least a workshop on every one of the root causes of violence, because it's beyond the month of October and it's so permeating in the community at large that it makes violence against women as another acceptable norm, because now everybody is acting violently. So why are women complaining? But then with the economic piece, with the education piece, with the children being used as a pawn for the abusive relationship, every one of these components, that's why I said we've touched just a speck in the dust, because every one of these will deserve a day, if not more, of a workshop. So I want us to, maybe Barbara and I will work towards getting workshops that will just focus on violence, and then have discussions around that with professionals such as Jay, such as Delilah, such as all of us are professionals. If we had one life experience with someone who's been the subject of any degree, I agree with Edie, and I did say it gets worse. So that the degrees are, some of it is up to us to not let it get to that point. So education allows the ones who start on the love relationship to not let it turn into violence and abuse. So again, there's so much around it that we could be talking about for months and months.